Hi, this is Andy Hoffman, Marketing Director of Miles Franklin Precious Metals in our 26th year in business. It's Monday morning, July 6, 2015, and the title of today's audio blog is Oxy to the TROIKA, a dagger to the powers that be. Sunday, July 5th, 2015 will go down in history for a variety of reasons. For one, the Grateful Dead, 20 years after the death of Jerry Garcia, played its final concert nearly 50 years after the so-called San Jose acid test show of December 1965. Back in my college days, I was a huge Deadhead, having seen nearly a dozen shows in venues ranging from Nassau Coliseum to Madison Square Garden, Giant Stadium, Foxborough Stadium in New England, and the Knickerbocker Arena in Albany. To me, particularly during the turbulent and trying mental experience of young adulthood, the Grateful Dead symbolized peace, harmony, and love, and consequently the world was a better place due to their existence. Of course, music is just fun and games compared to the stark reality of the historic Greek austerity, or should I say anti-austerity referendum, which having passed by a count of 61% oxy, or no, to 39% yes, was not quite the landslide I expected, but was a far more powerful result than what was opined by 99% of the world's so-called pundits, some of which were simply tasked with spreading anti-no propaganda, and some of which actually believed the Greeks, which have already been through hell and back, would actually kowtow to the very monsters that destroyed their proud nation, which among other things boasts its moniker as the so-called birthplace of democracy. Between Goldman Sachs, which helped Greece hide much of its debt off balance sheet, no doubt in return for monstrous banking fees, and the so-called Troika of the ECB, IMF, and the European Union, which milked Greece dry, destroying their economy and forcing them into permanent debt servitude, it's not an understatement to suggest the Greeks' overall view of the Western powers that be as one of pure evil, which at all costs must be destroyed. Which is exactly what yesterday's vote will in fact catalyze, 44 years after the global gold standard was abandoned, as the Greeks took what will likely be the first step toward destroying the hideous, impoverishing fiat regime that replaced it. At this point, the only remaining question is whether the inevitable implosion of history's largest, most destructive fiat Ponzi scheme will snowball immediately or take a bit more time as said powers that be attempt one last overdose of unprecedented money printing, market manipulation, and propaganda, which I assure you they not only will, but have already started this morning on all fronts. Money printing-wise, who knows what weapons of mass financial destruction the ECB, Fed, and other malignant partners are deploying to prevent the immediate post-vote response from being cataclysmic. Heck, we already know the PBOC in China entered the overt stock buying business this morning, announcing Saturday that, like the Bank of Japan does regularly, it is stepping in to support the collapsing Shanghai exchange, which after Friday's 5.5% bloodbath is now down a whopping 29% in barely 2 weeks. Putting this hideous collapse in perspective, the Dow plunged 33% in a week in October 1929, whilst the one-day Dow crash in October 1987 was less than 23%. Only this time around, the amount of margin exposed to the Chinese plunge, the vast majority of it piled on by retail accounts at the top, was vastly larger. To that end, a Deutsche Bank research note this morning opined that said losses are, quote, so large as regards the 20 million retail accounts opened from mid-April to mid-June that in aggregate no money has been made for 2 years, dating back a year before the Shanghai exploded higher. Not to mention, the Chinese economy was in free fall before this month's historic crash from unprecedented levels of equity valuation, as opposed to the United States in 1929 and 1987, when its pre-crash economy was in great shape. Throw in the nearly $20 trillion of debt financed by China's unregulated shadow banking sector, and you can see why the impact of the Chinese crash on both global economic activity and central bank money printing policy will be dramatically more pronounced and deadly to the 99% of global denizens that do not benefit from hyperinflation. And by the way, for those that still believe central bankers are anything more than Keystone cops running around like chickens with their heads cut off, consider some of the sophisticated measures the PBOC has instituted in the past 2 trading days alone, whilst the epic bubble they created hopelessly implodes. First, They banned either writing or speaking negatively about the stock market, and second, they are now allowing citizens sitting on massive margin stock losses to use their homes as collateral to meet margin calls. No, nothing negative could possibly come of such lunatic policies, right? Anyhow, as we entered the weekend, I discussed just how cataclysmic the global forces of politics, economics, and finance were before the Greek referendum, as discussed in Thursday's audioblog, Massively Important Topics Before the Greek Referendum. All of which, by the way, practically beg Janet Yellen to not only delay the mythical rate hikes the Fed's been suggesting are just around the corner for more than 2 years, but institute what I have deemed the Yellen reversal by conversely taking interest rates negative and instituting QE4. Thursday's historically hideous NFP employment report, featuring flat wages, collapsing full-time employment, and the lowest labor participation rate in 38 years, along with the largest year-over-year plunge in factory orders since, drumroll please, 2009, and countless other collapsing data points, including record oil production amidst record inventories and stagnant demand, suggest the July 29th FOMC meeting may well be remembered not for the so-called rate hike preparations propagandists like Steve Leisman and John Hilsenrath are paid to report, but the commencement of imminent QE4 chatter in the mainstream media. Let alone if, or should I say when, the Greek, Puerto Rican, Chinese, and who knows how many other geopolitical, financial, and economic crises start to boil over. And don't forget the Spanish prime minister elections, now just 5 months away, in which Alexis Tsipras-like candidate Pablo Iglesias of the Syriza-like Podemos party is expected to become the next prime minister, and demand that, like Greece, Spain be allowed to abort austerity and potentially default on its far larger debts. Not to mention potential black swan rumblings from the rest of the pigs, particularly if the Greek default and Grexit movement picks up steam. I mean, France's Marine Le Pen, who will just yesterday claimed France would mimic the Grexit movement when she wins the presidency in 2017, stating, European countries should take advantage of this event to gather around the negotiating table, take stock of the failure of the euro and austerity, and organize the dissolution of the single currency system, which is needed to get back to real growth, employment, and debt reduction. Ditto for Italy, which is in far worse economic shape than either Spain or France. Currently, the highly charismatic Beppe Grillo, whom I deem the Jon Stewart of Italy, leads the majority party in Italy's parliament, i.e. the five-star movement he himself created just 5 years ago. Grillo, like Le Pen, has been one of Europe's most outspoken enemies of the Eurozone trade union and euro currency. And following yesterday's historic Greek referendum, it is highly likely the petition process he commenced last year to garner enough signatures to force a referendum on whether Italy should remain in the Eurozone, and by extension the euro currency, will reach the required critical mass. Recall what I wrote in November's Revenge of the People, in which I predicted an explosion of anti-government referendums, like the ones we saw last year in Scotland, Catalonia, and Switzerland, and this year for starters in Greece. And per the title of today's audio blog, yesterday's Greek referendum was unquestionably a dagger in the cold, dead hearts of the Western powers that be, as unquestionably said referendum movement is about to go parabolic. Not just in figs like Spain, France, and Italy, but in the UK, which is expected to hold its own Brexit referendum next year. And what's this? Austria, which on Friday announced that a petition to hold a referendum on European Union membership itself reached a critical mass, mandating a parliamentary debate on the topic. As for Greece, what actually will occur next? Well, of course, there's what's expected to occur, like last week's universal expectation of a yes vote, or LOL, the meeting with European creditors within 24 hours of the referendum's close, as promised yesterday morning by Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. And then there's the reality of what might occur in an historically destabilized political, economic, and financial environment, like Varoufakis' resignation announced this morning, with not a prayer of such meeting occurring. I mean, this morning alone, forget what's going on in rigged financial markets and look into the whites of the eyes of collapsing commodity markets, which by far is a far more devastating factor than anything the various central bank PPT mechanisms can accomplish in rigged stock markets, or propaganda schemes like double LOL trying to convince the world a new Greek bailout is possible despite the no vote, so long as Greece simply ignores the Troika's new and improved demands. Yeah, that'll work out when pigs fly, no pun intended. More importantly, as I write, WTI crude is nearing $54 a barrel, down from nearly $62 a barrel just a week ago, whilst base metals are in free fall, as the so-called oil and copper PPTs I've railed about for the past month are decidedly collapsing. To that end, it's only a matter of time before the CRB commodity index, and in turn global export prices, falls the final 4% to its spike low of early 2009. Which, by the way, is just 4% above a support level dating back 40 years. And care of what I wrote in January's direst prediction of all, only hyperinflation will be able to keep this level from being decidedly taken out, ravaging the world's largest business and primary source of income for countless heavily over-indebted corporations, municipalities, and sovereign nations. And the most ironic part of all is that whilst this carnage is occurring, our brilliant Nobel Prize winning president is attempting to create what he views to be a Camp David moment prior to next year's elections by signing a nuclear disarmament treaty with Iran, which, if it is agreed upon as expected tomorrow, will flood the world with hundreds of millions of barrels of unneeded Iranian crude, swamping prices further and destroying what's left of the collapsing U.S. E&P industry, that is, exploration and production, which just happens to account for roughly a third of all U.S. capital expenditures and has been the only industry creating high-paying jobs since the 2008 financial crisis. And adding insult to injury, as the summer driving season winds down, thus significantly reducing seasonal gasoline demand, nearly all of the hedges that enabled high-cost shale producers to survive this long will expire, catapulting dozens, if not hundreds of oil companies into bankruptcy. And FYI, the last time the ratio of high-yield bond downgrades to upgrades was this high was in 2012, just before Bernanke unleashed QE3. Back to Greece, there is really no way of knowing what will occur in the near term, particularly if said PPT mechanisms lose control of global stock, bond, currency, and/or commodity markets. Greece may well be forced to Grexit irrespective of its hopes, dreams, or strategizing, and for that matter, said TROIKA may well be forced to cut it loose, as Chris O'Donnell was forced to do to James Caan in Vertical Limit. Perhaps they can buy a bit more time, but perhaps the Greeks will hyperinflate the euro by counterfeiting it, or bail in depositors, or who knows what other financial horrors. Or perhaps financial markets will domino downward across Europe, the rest of the emerging world, and so-called first world nations like the US, the UK, and Japan. I mean, who knows? Of course, what will occur in the long term, and by long term I don't mean years, but likely months, the global explosion in demand for real money will only go parabolic, no matter how hard cartel attempts to delay the inevitable with capping and attacking paper algorithms, like last night's 105th Sunday night sentiment rate of the past 107 weekends and 468th 2:15 a.m. attack of the past 534 trading days. Already, global precious metals demand is at an all-time high as we speak, whilst inventories are at an all-time low, and the prospect of collapsing supply as the global precious metal mining industry implodes is not just baked in the cake as a long-term inevitability, but now a short-term imminence, particularly in silver, given the utter implosion of base metal prices. Remember, roughly two-thirds of all silver production is byproduct of other mine types, but principally copper, lead, and zinc. And nowhere is the mining industry collapse better symbolized than in the potential delisting from the New York Stock Exchange of Rob McEwen's arrogantly named McEwen Mining, which is now down 90% in the past 4 years, from $10 a share to below $1 a share. To that, I might add, with his other company, Lexum VG Gold, down 95% during this time. Sadly, McEwen, who rose to fame by not only founding Goldcorp, but at one time having a policy of holding back production when the cartel suppressed prices, has spent the past decade playing bankers' games, handing millions of fees to Bay Street bankers to roll up his haphazard property acquisitions, whilst forsaking his once staunch anti-cartel stance and leaving the battle to true financial patriots like Eric Sprott. Hopefully, McEwen has been humbled enough both reputationally and financially, to retake up this fight, which the Miles Franklin bloc has fought unwaveringly for 15 years, which clearly is on the verge of being won, as demonstrated by the aforementioned explosion in global demand, whilst global inventories and shortly supply collapse. And now that it's become public knowledge that the precious metal derivatives explosion at so-called too-big-to-fail banks like Citigroup and JP Morgan are behind the past 4 years' relentless artificial suppressions, it's just a matter of time before the paper juggernaut they've created is swamped by the reality of physical supply and demand fundamentals, as history's largest, most destructive fiat currency regime implodes. To that end, we can only reiterate as vehemently as possible that the time is now to protect yourself while you still can. Here at Miles Franklin, we have conducted business for 26 years without a single registered complaint and can help you not only with the purchase, sale, or storage of precious metals, but a variety of financial planning strategies we have honed over 2 decades of working with gold and silver. In fact, not only did I tape a podcast with Miles Franklin's president and co-founder, Andy Schechtman, earlier this year to describe such strategies, titled Swaps, Trades, and Repatriations, which you can find on our website or by Googling, but we'll be taping an interview with him later this week about the bullion industry itself, following last week's news that a longtime competitor, Bullion Direct, quote, suspended operations in what has all the look and feel of a Tolving-style implosion. As for Miles Franklin, all we ask is that you give us a call at 800-822-8080 and allow our staff of professionals, on average sporting nearly 25 years of industry experience, to give you a free consultation. And as always, I can be reached via email at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com. And to conclude, I think a quote from the great Paul Craig Roberts is in order of just how historic and globally significant yesterday's Greek oxy vote was. Quote, 2,500 years ago, Greeks saved their independence from the Persian Empire. Sunday's vote will tell us whether Greeks have again served liberty or whether they have succumbed to Washington's empire. The fate of all Europeans and of Americans themselves will be settled on Sunday.